himself a Futurist. They have driven all the pigs away. Oh, that they had driven away the prigs and left the pigs! The sky begins to droop with darkness, and all birds and blossoms to descend unfaltering into the healthy underworld, where things slumber and grow. There was just one true phrase of Mr. Marinetti about himself: the feverish insomnia. The whole universe is pouring headlong to the happiness of the night. It is only the madman who has not the courage to sleep. Dukes. The Duc de Chambertin Pommard was a small but lively relic of a really aristocratic family, the members of which were nearly all atheists up to the time of the French Revolution. But since that event, beneficial in such various ways, had been very devout. He was a Royalist, a Nationalist, and a perfectly sincere patriot in that particular style which consists of ceaselessly asserting that one's country is not so much in danger as already destroyed. He wrote cheery little articles for the Royalist press, entitled "The End of France," or "The Last Cry," or what not, and he gave the final touches to a picture of the Kaiser riding across a pavement of prostrate Parisians with a glow of patriotic exultation. He was quite poor, and even his relations had no money. He walked briskly to all his meals at a little open café, and he looked just like everybody else. Living in a country where aristocracy does not exist, he had a high opinion of it. He would yearn for the swords and the stately manners of the Pommards before the Revolution, most of whom had been in theory republicans. But he turned with a more practical eagerness to the one country in Europe where the tricolour has never flown, and men have never been roughly equalized before the State. The beacon and comfort of his life was England, which all Europe sees clearly as the one pure aristocracy that remains. He had, moreover, a mild taste for sport, and kept an English bulldog, and he believed the English to be a race of bulldogs, of heroic squires and hardy yeoman vassals, because he read all this in English Conservative papers written by exhausted little Levantine clerks. But his reading was naturally for the most part in the French Conservative papers, though he knew English well, and it was in these that he first heard of the horrible Budget. There he read of the confiscatory revolution planned by the Lord Chancellor of the Exchequer, the sinister Georges Lloyd. He also read how chivalrously Prince Arthur Balfour of Burleigh had defied that demagogue, assisted by Austen, the Lord Chamberlain, and a gay and witty Walter Lang. And being a brisk partisan and a capable journalist, he decided to pay England a special visit and report to his papers upon the struggle. He drove for an eternity in an open fly through beautiful woods, with a letter of introduction in his pocket to one duke who was to introduce him to another duke. The endless and numberless avenues of bewildering pine woods gave him a queer feeling that he was driving through the countless corridors of a dream. Yet the vast silence and freshness healed his irritations at modern ugliness and unrest. It seemed a background fit for the return of chivalry. In such a forest a king and all his court might lose themselves hunting, or a knight errant might perish with no companion but God. The castle itself, when he reached it, was somewhat smaller than he had expected, but he was delighted with its romantic and castellated outline. He was just about to alight when somebody opened two enormous gates at the side, and the vehicle drove briskly through. "That is not the house?" he inquired politely of the driver. "No, sir," said the driver, controlling the corners of his mouth. "The lodge, sir." "Indeed," said the Duke de Chambertin Pommard. "This is where the Duke's land begins?" "Oh no, sir," said the man, quite in distress. "We've been in his Grace's land all day." The Frenchman thanked him and leant back in the carriage, feeling as if everything were incredibly huge and vast, like Gulliver in the country of the Brobdingnags. He got out in front of a long façade of a somewhat severe building, and a little careless man in a shooting jacket and knickerbockers ran down the steps. He had a weak, fair moustache and dull blue babyish eyes. His features were insignificant, but his manner extremely pleasant and hospitable. This was the Duke of Aylesbury, perhaps the largest landowner in Europe, and known only as a horse breeder until he began to write abrupt little letters about the budget. He led the French Duke upstairs, taking trivialities in a hearty way, and there presented him to another and more important English oligarch, who got up from a writing desk with a slightly senile jerk. He had a gleaming bald head and glasses. The lower part of his face was masked with a short dark beard, which did not conceal a beaming smile, not unmixed with sharpness. He stooped a little as he ran, like some sedentary head clerk or cashier, and even without the cheque book and papers on his desk he would have given the impression of a merchant or man of business. He was dressed in a light grey check jacket. He was the Duke of Windsor, the great Unionist statesman. Between these two loose, amiable men the little Gaul stood erect in his black frock coat with the monstrous gravity of French ceremonial good manners. This stiffness led the Duke of Windsor to put him at his ease like a tenant, and he said, rubbing his hands, "I was delighted with your letter, delighted. I shall be very pleased if I can give you any details." "My visit," said the Frenchman, "scarcely suffices for the scientific exhaustion of detail. I seek only the idea. The idea, that is always the immediate thing." "Quite so," said the other rapidly, "quite so. The idea." Feeling somehow that it was his turn, the English Duke having done all that could be required of him, Pommard had to say, "I mean the idea of aristocracy. I regard this as the last great battle for the idea. Aristocracy, like any other thing, must justify itself to mankind. Aristocracy is good because it preserves a picture of human dignity in a world where that dignity is often obscured by servile necessities. Aristocracy alone can keep a certain high reticence of soul and body, a certain noble distance between the sexes." The Duke of Aylesbury, who had a clouded recollection of having squirted soda water down the neck of a countess on the previous evening, looked somewhat gloomy, as if lamenting the theoretic spirit of the Latin race. The elder Duke laughed heartily and said, "Well, well, you know, we English are horribly practical. With us the great question is the land. Out here in the country, do you know this part?" "Yes, yes," cried the Frenchman eagerly, "I see what you mean. The country, the old rustic life of humanity, a holy war upon the bloated and filthy towns. What right have these anarchists to attack your busy and prosperous countrysides? Have they not thriven under your management? Are not the English villages always growing larger and gayer under the enthusiastic leadership of their encouraging squires? Have you not the Maypole? Have you not Merry England?" The Duke of Aylesbury made a noise in his throat, and then said very indistinctly, "They all go to London." "All go to London?" repeated Pommard with a blank stare. "Why?" This time nobody answered, and Pommard had to attack again. "The spirit of aristocracy is essentially opposed to the greed of the industrial cities. Yet in France there are actually one or two nobles so vile as to drive coal and gas trades, and drive them hard." The Duke of Windsor looked at the carpet. The Duke of Aylesbury went and looked out of the window. At length the latter said, "That's rather stiff, you know. One has to look after one's own business in town as well." "Do not say it," cried the little Frenchman, starting up. "I tell you all Europe is one fight between business and honour. If we do not fight for honour, who will? What other right have we two poor-legged sinners to titles and quartered shields, except that we staggeringly support some idea of giving things which cannot be demanded and avoiding things which cannot be punished? Our only claim is to be a wall across Christendom against the Jew pedlars and pawnbrokers, against the Goldsteins and the—" And the Duke of Aylesbury swung round with his hands in his pockets. "Oh, I say," he said, "you've been reading Lloyd George." Nobody but dirty Radicals can say a word against Goldstein." "I certainly cannot permit," said the elder Duke, rising rather shyly.